Shelby Oaks is directed by Chris Stuckmann and stars Camille Sullivan, Keith David, and among others. And in this story, it deals with a young woman that goes missing along with her friends that are doing this paranormal investigation in the town of Shelby Oaks. And years later, her older sister, played by Camille Sullivan, is putting up a documentary about her disappearance, and then eventually tries to go and search for clues to end up looking for her after she goes missing. Now I'll leave it there because it's pretty straightforward as the movie deals into more of the investigation that's involving with her sister, while it also gets into some other things that are going on with the mysterious town of Shelby Oaks. Now here's some backstory. Now this movie was directed by Chris Stuckmann, who, what can I say, I myself, I've been an avid fan of his work on YouTube for many years. For many years I've watched his reviews of a lot of movies that he's done, and I give a big shout out to him as making his first movie as a director, and hopefully in the future, he ends up having to create more movies down the line. As I know it's definitely it's always one's journey to essentially go into making movies and everything, and this has been a lifelong project for him to do for a while. And there's been some talk about the movie coming out with for quite some time, especially how it got involved with Mike Flanagan as an executive producer. And from what I also heard, it got wide distribution from Neon, and they had to do some reshoots and that added additional budget to the film. And so I was looking forward to this. I was definitely interested in what the movie was going to bring, especially with it. I get into these type of disappearance, like investigation type movies, because the movie also has this kind of vibe that's very similar to like Blair Witch Project in some ways, where it does a blend of like found footage mixed in with some other things. And so going into the trailers in this, it certainly had my attention. And upon seeing it, I can say that, well, I can definitely see the ambition that Chris Stuckmann was really going for in this, and I hope that he eventually gets to find more films down the line in the future. I will say that as his first film, I found it decent, but it definitely leaves some things to be desired quite a lot. But I will say that it's a decent effort. I just think that it just had some things that really could have been a lot better with, especially with it being, his first time directing or anything. Now, to get my pros out of the way, I thought the cast in this were great. Camille Sullivan, she really carries this movie like to a T. I really found her investigation of her sister really engaging, and the way that it was able to present this kind of documentary style was interesting with her, especially in the first like 10 or 15 minutes. And she really commands it all, especially with the way that she's going through the lengths to try to go after her sister. And so she really nails it, along with the other cast. It's great to see familiar favorites in this that I really was surprised to see, like Keith David, and also the rest of the cast too, like Brandon Sexton III, and among that. And so the rest of the cast were all great as well. And then the production design, I got to really give it top notch. Like for it being a very as his first time directing, it was interesting that Stuckmann was able to make some really great shots work, especially with the cinematography and how it looks very cinematic. I mean, for it being an indie film, it actually does. You can definitely tell that it's really going for a cinematic type of feel, and I really do appreciate how it blends in with the whole documentary style that they're going for, along with the found footage approach that they do in the beginning of it. And so when it comes, and it was also interesting to see some of the like old YouTube footage that was reminiscent of the old days back in like 2008 and stuff. So that was spot on. And to get my other pros, I really appreciate how the movie is building tension along as you're seeing a lot of the things that are unfolding, where you're getting it piece by piece, especially in the first half. And when it gets into the stuff that's investigating with the actual case, it goes into there is some really neat production design, especially when we get to see this old prison that it takes place at in some scenes. The music, the score was great as well, with how it's building tension up. And when it gets into the actual, when it does show like gore in the film, I was actually really surprised how out there it is. You can definitely tell those were some of the scenes they pretty much added the additional reshoots on, but I thought it worked at least from the visual level. Now, if I'm going to have to get into some of my cons, we'll have to say what I feel like does bog the movie down is definitely the writing. Now, the actual concept itself about the missing sister going on this paranormal investigation, I do like where it was going in the first half of it, but the problem is that it adds up, it starts to unravel other things that are either not really fully explored in the film of the town of Shelby Oaks itself, or it gets into some other stuff where they kind of don't really make certain, there's certain choices in the film that I did kind of question the logic behind. Like, for example, with the whole thing about her going on this investigation, look for her sister, and you have and you have her husband, the older sister's husband in the film. That's, that you feel like is going to probably be like a big point in the film, but only he kind of disappears later on, and it would have made more sense to kind of like follow along with him going on the investigation, or even this other cop they introduced at the beginning of the film. And I know they do kind of explain it in the movie about certain things that she's keeping away from the police. But it still makes it seem like there was more things they could have added more on depth with, or they could have really wrote something else in mind to kind of explain exactly why she does a lot of this by herself. On top of that, when it does get into the later half of the film, it does start to bind down with some of the pacing, where it feels like it's kind of slower than usual, and it's just a lot of scenes that feel like they're a bit dragged out more than necessary to kind of get to the point. And when we also get to the final climax, I did kind of find myself not really quite as, like, when it gets to the reveal and everything going wrong, I had a feeling where it was going to with familiar territory, but it also feels like there's more they really could have explored with that, and it also seems like we're missing quite a big climax that could have really took place in full, because it really feels like it was very rushed, especially toward the end of it. And when it also gets to the final, like, 10 minutes, while it was interesting to see on a visual level, I did feel like it left a lot of things that we've kind of seen that been there, done that sort of approach. And so there's definitely more that they could have really went out with, especially when we get to the other half of the film. So there's definitely some things in the writing that leaves it to be desired. That, and there's also some typical jump scares that you've seen countless times with other horror films. And while there are a couple that are effective, and there's some really good gore scenes that happen throughout, it did feel like the movie did lack tension on certain parts, and then especially when we get later on in the film. But overall, though, I did say that while I did enjoy the first half, and the movie does boggle down, especially later on, it still was a decent effort, and I definitely am looking forward to see what Chris Stuckmann does in the future, if he does continue to make other horror films down the line. But with that being said, I'm going to give the movie just a average Joe on the Film Reeks Fiender. Not bad, but definitely could have done a lot better with it. So, for those of you who have also seen Shelby Oaks, let me know in the comments what you thought about it, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.